Such events were beyond my comprehension. They seemed to be relics of a mysterious lost era. But this year, in full color and instantaneously, we are once again seeing Europeans killing one another and bombing cities. Things like this aren't supposed to happen, right? Ukraine has long been considered the breadbasket of Europe because of its history of grain production. It is estimated that in 2021, Ukraine produced 80 million metric tons of grain, which includes wheat, corn, and barley. In 2022, the story is expected to be dramatically different. Because of the physical devastation of Ukrainian farmland, and because many of the people who would otherwise be involved in planting, tending, and harvesting the crop are dead, refugees inside or outside Ukraine, or otherwise unable to take part, it is expected that Ukraine will produce less than half of its normal amount of grain. On top of that, destroyed railways, airports, and ports have made it difficult to get grain being stored in Ukraine from last year's harvest out of the country. The UN estimates that some 25 million tons, that's 50 billion pounds, of grain are stuck in Ukraine and at risk of rotting. Even with recent developments which seem designed to allow at least some grain to be sent out of Ukraine, it may be quite some time before significant amounts are actually on the move. It seems more than plausible that at this time last year, Ukrainians would not have foreseen where they'd be today, grappling with widespread destruction, dislocation, and death. Because of similar disruptions and also because of international sanctions, Russia, the world's largest wheat exporter, will also see exports decline. Some of the grain Ukraine produces is intended to be consumed at home by people or animals, or held back for next year's planting. But the portion which is exported is not usually destined for Europe. Ukraine's wheat exports are intended primarily for North Africa and South Asia, with Indonesia, Egypt, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Morocco each expecting over 1 million tons, that's 2 billion pounds, of Ukrainian wheat each summer. They won't be getting that this year. This spring, the Group of 7 wealthy democracies issued a statement saying that the war, quote, has generated one of the most severe food and energy crises in recent history, which now threatens those most vulnerable across the globe. Given the fact that the global wheat market is expected to be considerably smaller this year compared to 2021, the laws of supply and demand are kicking in, and prices are going up, which of course can be said for a lot of things, putting even more pressure on Ukraine's typical customers to be able to find food for their citizens. Many people are sounding the alarms about the possibility of famine in parts of the world which simply can't afford to pay the price being demanded for the reduced amount of available grain. According to the World Food Program, the effects of this war may push some 44 million people closer to starvation. Compounding the problems are reports of a poor harvest in China and crops affected by dire heat in India, the world's second largest wheat producer, which indicated earlier this year that it was banning most wheat exports. Heat in India is not the only environmental concern affecting the harvest this year. 4 expected rainy seasons over the past 2 years have failed in the Horn of Africa region, leading to dire water shortages affecting crops and farm animals and impelling people to move where they can find water. According to the Famine Early Warning Network and the Food Security and Nutrition Analysis Unit of the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, almost half the population of Somalia, 7.1 million people, will confront crisis-level food insecurity or worse until the fall, and some 213,000 people there face catastrophic hunger and starvation. Though conditions have often been difficult in these parts of the world, it's conceivable that at this time a year ago, many of these thousands and millions of people would not have imagined how bad it would be today. Between them, Russia and Ukraine reportedly have typically supplied some 40% of Africa's grain, much of which will not arrive this year. Recall what I said a moment ago. The UN estimates that some 25 million tons, 50 billion pounds of grain are stuck in Ukraine at risk of rotting. The rise in global wheat prices is certainly being felt here at home as well, with food prices increasing along with the prices of much else. This may well be good for farmers if they're not locked into contracts executed before this year, which set a lower price. And while many of us here are fortunate to be able to absorb an increase in the cost of our groceries, many in our communities, of course, are not. Yet the effects of war tell only a part of the picture. In June, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune ran an article about the phenomenon of increased grocery prices with the headline, "Why Food Inflation May Linger, as Explained by a Loaf of Bread." The gist of this article was that while, yes, increases in the price of wheat will have an effect on the prices of a loaf of bread, an even greater impact on the price comes from the expenses associated with actually baking, packaging, and shipping that loaf. Among the points the story made, higher gasoline and diesel prices make it more expensive to move wheat, flour, and bread from farm to store shelf. Food makers are passing along fuel surcharges to grocers to offset these costs, forcing them to pass on increased prices to customers. At factories and warehouses, it's getting more expensive to keep the lights on, ovens hot, and buildings cool as electricity costs increase. Like many industries, food manufacturers are short-staffed. As a result, wages are going up to recruit workers, and suddenly the cost of making bread is just that much more expensive. Long-distance trucking costs have jumped a staggering 70% over the past 2 years, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, after rising a combined 35% over the previous 20 years. The comparatively high price of oil directly translates into higher prices for petroleum-derived plastics, including the bags our bread comes in. With all these shocks to our system for growing grains and feeding people, when a simple loaf of bread becomes an illustration of the economic upheavals affecting so many of us, is this the year that perhaps we should not celebrate Lammas, a holiday associated with grains and bread? If you've seen me speak here before, you perhaps have realized that I have a thing for time. I've been a big fan of history since I was a kid, and I'm fascinated by the passage of time and by the idea that a particular place may have been called home by very different types of people over the course of centuries or millennia. It won't be a surprise then to imagine that I'm drawn to archaeology. In fact, I've said before that if I had to do it all over again, that might well be what I'd do for a career. For now, it's just a hobby. One of the sacred spots for many archaeologists is Pompeii, the heartbreakingly doomed Roman city near Naples. It was something of a resort town, a place where the elite might get away from the big eternal city for a while, and so it was known as a very pleasant place with natural beauty and a variety of attractions. On a sunny summer day in August, the 24th, in year 79 of the Common Era, nearby Mount Vesuvius erupted catastrophically. There had been warnings of something afoot in the otherwise docile mountain, but despite the signs, people didn't think the worst could happen. Things like this aren't supposed to happen, right? Most bet wrong. That morning, waves of searing, unsurvivable heat blasted through Pompeii and other towns, and ultimately, these picturesque villages were buried under meters of ash, which hardened into a tomb for all those who could not escape. It would be some 17 centuries before people got glimpses into Pompeian rooms or stood again on Pompeian streets. What archaeologists came to see was that Vesuvius all but froze that day in time. That morning, people awoke, had breakfast, honored their gods, chatted with neighbors in what would prove to be their final hours. Artisans and shopkeepers began their workdays, bakers too. Having mixed the flour, the salt, the water, and the yeast, having let the dough rise, having kneaded it and shaped it, the bakers placed the dough into the ovens and looked forward to the delicious loaves they would produce. They most assuredly would not have been able to imagine that they would never see or taste that bread, that nobody would ever eat it, that the dough prepared in the era of Roman emperors would not see the light of day until carefully removed, blackened by the heat and the intervening centuries on the cusp of the Industrial Revolution. And yet, so it came to be. You may have heard recently about the excavation of what appears to have been a Pompeian food stall in a marketplace, perhaps not all that different from the sorts of stalls we may see later this month at the State Fair. Pompeii was a vacation getaway. People would have splurged a bit on things like that. Pompeian bakers, like all the rest, catered to the tourist trade and produced a type of treat that might sound vaguely familiar to modern ears. It involved a flattish piece of bread covered with sauce or oil and other toppings. Then, as now, people could not resist a good pizza, and indications of this delicacy have turned up in that buried town. Pizza has been on my own mind a bit since we celebrated Lammas last. For a good 10 to 15 years, my father and I would get together every August for a long weekend of father-son bonding in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. These trips sometimes coincided with drama. The year one party nominated a woman and the other an authoritarian. The year I lost control of my car trying not to hit a deer. The year I drove out of town on 35W northbound but had to find a different way back because the 35W bridge into town no longer existed. The year we learned my cousin had died in a violent car accident. In 2021, our visit was arranged under the cloud of my father's struggle for some 7 months at that point with cancer. Typically a healthy man with no major medical concerns other than the run-of-the-mill issues an average 76-year-old man might expect to face, he had been diagnosed with lung cancer in January, followed by surgery in March, complications and more procedures, several rounds of chemotherapy and immunotherapy. By the time we met up in August, most of that was behind him, but he was weak. He tired easily, didn't eat as much as I would expect. He was optimistic, always optimistic, and said that these limitations were the lingering effects of the chemo, and that once it was out of his system in September, things would look up. It was hard to see him like this. I'd simply never seen him dealing with health concerns in this way. My father had been a vegan for about the past 2 years and was proud that he had lost a lot of weight, had felt better than he had in some time, and had been able to discontinue some of his routine medications because of the improvement in his health. Looking at the man in front of me, though, I had to ask, how had things come to this point? It was not possible to spend those days together and not understand that these annual trips would come to an end someday. On some level, each of us was contemplating my father's mortality. We talked about that, somewhat gingerly, since he anticipated beginning our recovery in a month's time. Always a practical, pragmatic sort who saw no point in candy-coating things or avoiding dealing with the circumstances that life presented, he was not terribly sentimental about the prospect of his own death. He reflected on his life, was happy with how it had all turned out, and had no regrets. He understood that it would come to an end someday, and he accepted that. But my father did say this. He said that if he ever got the dreaded 6-month prognosis, my father, the born-again vegan, would go out and get himself a pepperoni pizza. I figure, man, you're entitled. If those are your circumstances, go right ahead. We moved on to other things. The chemo did leave my father's body in September, but by mid-October, his health was in decline. He was unable to attend a family wedding in Chicago at the end of the month, and it fell to me to tell the relatives that instead of being at the wedding, he was in the hospital in Detroit, again, and that it didn't look good. I drove from Chicago back to Detroit on a Sunday, visiting him in the hospital where he was in good spirits, but just wanted to get home. He was released the following day, Monday, and I drove back to Minneapolis on Tuesday. On Wednesday, he had what's called a PET scan. This is a test that looks for cancer within a person's body. He got the results the following Monday. As he would have put it, the scan was lit up like a Christmas tree. There was cancer everywhere, and there was nothing to be done. Naturally, the question was, how long? The doctors were not very optimistic. They gave him anywhere from a week to 3 months. My father heard 3 months. I split the difference and thought 6 weeks. There was time. We didn't speak that day, Monday, but we did exchange texts. I told him we could talk whenever he was ready. And I did something I don't think I had done in decades, beside the standard sign-off in greeting cards. I told him I loved him. His last text to me ever was, "I love you too." We spoke by phone on Wednesday, and it was already clear he wasn't doing well and was getting confused and disoriented, 2 words I would never before have used to describe my father. On Thursday, he went into hospice. I flew back to Detroit on Friday and visited him at the facility. For the most part, he was already gone. I returned home on Sunday afternoon. He passed away Sunday night. I knew it was coming, but when I got the news, it was still, as they say in boxing, a hit to the breadbasket. That Monday, he'd been given a week to 3 months. Always the optimist, he'd heard 3 months. He didn't even get the week. He certainly didn't get a 6-month prognosis. And I doubt he ever really foresaw the possibility he would never get his pepperoni pizza. The fact that he'd missed out on this one last wish ate at me. So a few days after he died, I made my own way, alone, over to a local pizzeria by my house, and I ordered a pepperoni pizza. As a vegan, the pepperoni was his no-no. As a carb watcher, usually, for me, the crust was the sinful indulgence. And yet, as I ate that pizza in his honor, I savored every floury mouthful regardless of the consequences to my waistline. With each slice, because of course I ate the entire thing, I thought of my father, wistful that I was eating the pizza he never got a chance to enjoy. We should have ordered some when we were together up north, or when I was in Detroit that last time. We assumed we'd have that chance, but we never realized it was already too late. Surely, if there were ever a year to forego marking Lammas, it would be this one, right? As they say, bad things happen to good people. Lives are disarranged or lost due to wars, or famine, or natural disasters, or by disease. No spiritual system worth its salt can avoid confronting this and responding to this reality. In the past, it could be said that someone had angered the gods, or someone else's gods were better than yours, ergo, suffering. Humanism doesn't go in for that sort of thing. I understand humanism to accept that, yes, these things happen, and that it calls us to confront that reality we face and not dream of something that we would prefer. I believe humanism can fortify a person to meet the challenges as they come, with faith in a set of principles based in fact and reason to get us through. In this space, we know in our bones that we don't need superhuman heroes to get us through these challenging times. We need human beings, everyday, mortal, and yes, imperfect human beings. We need one another. And we need familiar rituals, like Lammas. In her book, Becoming Bread, author Gunilla Norris writes, "We experience bread with all our senses. To be here on the breadboard, this loaf has gone through the fire. When we look at the loaf, we may think how we too must go through fire to become ourselves, to become sustenance for each other, and for life itself. This is how life has always been, how it has manifested itself through the universe, becoming, sustaining, and surrendering to become again another way, another time." With Lammas, we enter a different phase of the cycle of seasons. After a season of planting and tending, we move into the time of harvest. Throughout human history, at least in the era of agriculture, people have anxiously awaited this time of year to see how the fields will produce, if the crops survive and come in abundance, if the hail and the locusts and the floods and the drought have been overcome, and if the community will have enough to make it through the quiet, fallow period to come. A good harvest season is a time of thanksgiving, of gratitude. In a bad harvest season, people must pull together to do what is needed to survive. And there will be bad harvests. One might ask, what good can be made of them? I would certainly say we have been compelled to go through fire ourselves a great deal these past few years, through assaults on our democracy, the effects of war, pandemic, and economic upheaval, and if this summer's spate of Supreme Court decisions is any indication, we have trying times on the horizon. We will be put to the test. We will feel the heat. As humanists, We know that the world challenges us in myriad ways, and that there is no supernatural force out there that will save us from those times. We know that over the course of our lives, we will experience hardship and horror, loss and grief. And we will also experience rest, wonder, and joy. As you know, despite war, famine, natural disasters, and death, Lammas still can also call us to feel gratitude. I'm grateful that as an adherent of a tradition whose fifth principle affirms the use of the democratic process in society at large, we currently have elected officials similarly committed to the democratic process where it is under attack abroad and in our own country as well. I'm grateful to know that if famine stalks vulnerable people around the globe, governments, charities, and individuals will step up to make sure we don't lose sight of this and insist we do everything we can to help. I am grateful that whether natural disasters come in the form of floods, fires, or storms, we still have people who will come forward to rescue and to comfort. I am grateful that I had the father I had and for all he'd been for me for over 5 decades. I am grateful to be reminded that regardless of the chaos and loss and hurt of this world, the wheel of the year still turns predictably, and we move through the seasons so familiar to countless generations who have gone before us. The earth does indeed forever turn. I am grateful for the family and friends in my life. I am grateful for this community, here in the building and online, who have been so supportive during the various challenges of the past few years. What would I do if I got the 6-month call? Or you? What would we do if we could foresee calamity coming our way? What would we do if we knew the curtain was coming down relatively soon? Would we take that one last trip we dreamed about? Would we reach out to somebody to patch up differences that no longer mattered? Would we tell someone we loved them? Indulge in a favorite food? As Mary Oliver asks at the end of her well-known poem, The Summer Day, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And what keeps us from doing these things today, right now? Lammas invites us to come, gather, receive what you need to be sustained, give what you can to sustain others. We will all experience times of loss and grief and despair. And we know that life will also bring us rest, wonder, and joy. This is a place where we can come together to share it all. And our little, occasionally oddball Lammas ceremony is a part of that. Ceremony is the way we can remember to remember, says author Robin Wall Kimmerer in Breeding Sweetgrass. Remember to remember that we have here one another. In the face of it all, in the face of challenges, global or mundane, we have one another. Gratitude in such times may seem frivolous, impossible, or even wrong, but like rest, wonder, and joy, gratitude is not a luxury. Each is something to savor whenever possible. We hope you'll think of this as you enjoy the traditional, delicious bread which our dedicated bakers have prepared downstairs, about which we will hear more shortly, and which they enthusiastically invite you to enjoy. And in that same spirit, I invite you now to join Lisa in responsive reading, number 727 in the Gray Book.
You can find this reading in the Gray Hymnal if you're here in person, or up there, I think. And if you are at home, we invite you to join along with us as we celebrate Lammas together. Please read the italicized parts. The bread we share this day is sacred. Grain, gift of the earth, gives life. The friendship we share this day is sacred. All gatherings when people meet and touch celebrate life. The laughter we share this day is sacred. The stillness we share this day is sacred. Peace. for bread, for friends, for joy and sorrow, for the comfort of quietness. Let us ever be grateful and caring. And now I'd like to invite up Shelley Schreffler to let us know what the bakers have been doing downstairs and how we get to benefit from it.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks, Phil, for a great talk. This morning, we have 2 varieties of bread for everyone to enjoy. The 3-grain wild rice. Anyone know what the 3 grains are? Wheat, rye, and wild rice. And then the other one is a honey whole wheat. There are slices, both with butter and without, downstairs for everybody to enjoy, plus a variety of toppings that Dave Lessler has prepared for us. And if you're interested in taking a loaf home with you, they'll be for sale for $6 each.
And now it's time to sing again. So please stand as you wish and join us in singing number 67 from the Gray Songbook. We sing now together, and we will be singing verses 1, 3, and 4, and the words will also be on the screen.
We sing now together our song of thanksgiving, rejoicing in goods which the ages have wrought, for life that enfolds us and helps and heals and holds us, and leads beyond the goals which our forebears once sought. We sing of the prophets, the teachers, the dreamers, designers, creators, and workers and seers, our own lives expanding, our gratitude commanding, their pledge that made immortal their days and their years. We sing of community now in the making, in every far continent, region, and land, with those of all races, all times and names and places. We pledge ourselves in covenant firmly to stand.
Please join me in the words of extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. All these we carry in our heart, in our minds, and until we are together again.
Oh, what a world, don't wanna leave. All kinds of magic, hard to believe. Oh, what a world, don't wanna leave. All kinds of magic, hard to believe. Northern lights in our skies, plants that grow in open your mind, things that swim with a neon glow. How we all got here, nobody knows. These are real things. These are real things. Oh, what a world. Don't wanna leave. All kinds of magic all around us. It's hard to believe. Thank God it's not too good to be true. Oh, what a world. And then there is you. Did I know you once in another life? Are we here just once? for a billion times. Well, I wish I knew, but it doesn't matter, 'cause you're here right now, and I know what I feel, and these are real things. These are real things. Oh, what a world. Don't wanna leave. All kinds of magic all around us. It's hard to believe. Thank God it's not too good to be true.